So, you've completed your experiment. That's awesome! Now, it's time to compare what you saw happen to what we saw happen in the research. But first, a brief recap about why the research was done and how the experiment was set up. Remember that global climate change is something that is affecting the whole world, but different parts of the world are predicted to experience climate changes in different ways. In the Northern California coastal mountain range, scientists used climate models to predict that the area may experience more rainfall and get wetter. Water makes plants grow. However, we don't really know how various plants will respond to additional rainfall. For example, some plant species could grow better than others and outcompete the plants in the area and therefore survive, while the others die or become less abundant. As plants react differently to the changing conditions in the area, all of the other organisms in the ecosystem are affected as well. When you change something at the bottom of a food chain, everything else in that food chain can be affected too. It's like the cascading effect of knocking down dominoes. Okay, so that was the background about climate change. So why did the scientists do this experiment? Well, they wanted to see how the plants and other organisms in a grassland meadow in Northern California would be affected by additional rainfall due to climate change. To attempt to make the area wetter, as is predicted to happen, the scientists set up 36 plots in South Meadow. Some of the plots were watered with an irrigation system, while others, called the control plots, were not. I'm going to tell you what happened in terms of three kinds of plants present in the grassland meadow ecosystem. The first functional group of plants is called the nitrogen fixers. Nitrogen-fixing plants are really important because they help add nitrogen to the soil. Nitrogen is a nutrient that plants need in a large quantity. So, if you have a lot of nitrogen-fixing plants in a meadow, the other plants in the area will probably grow better. The second functional group is called grasses, and you've probably heard of grass and know what grass is. The grass that was present in the meadow is probably not the same stuff that you see in your schoolyard or someone else's front lawn. Finally, the third functional group is called wildflowers. This group includes forbs, or non-grass plants, and did not include the nitrogen fixers because those were in their own group. So, what happened in the plots after the plots were watered? The initial response, or first response, that the scientists noticed was that the nitrogen-fixing plants grew in greater abundance. Now, remember that I said that nitrogen fixers are important because they add nitrogen to the soil. If the nitrogen fixers become more abundant, what do you think that means for the other plants in the area? If you said that some of the other plants were able to grow better, you're right. The nitrogen fixers interacted with the grasses in that they fertilized the grasses and helped them grow in more abundance. This is good for grasses, but as the grasses were able to grow better, they began to compete with the wildflowers for resources such as sunlight, nutrients, and water. The grasses were able to outcompete the wildflowers, meaning that the wildflowers had a harder time surviving because they couldn't get the things that they needed, and they became less abundant. Think about how such changes could affect the herbivores that feed on the plants. If a certain herbivore eats only wildflowers, and wildflowers become less abundant, that herbivore might have a harder time surviving. If the population of that herbivore declines, then the predators that eat that herbivore might have less food available to eat too. Can you see how a seemingly little change like adding water can have such a big effect on organisms in a food web? Besides plants and insects, other organisms rely on the plants in the meadow for food too. For example, we saw a lot of deer in the area. How do you think that deer might be affected by changes in the grassland meadow? This is why global climate change is really important to study. Changes that are predicted to occur, such as slight changes in temperature or precipitation patterns, can actually have major effects on the organisms that live there. If you did an experiment, what happened? Try to think about the interactions that you saw and maybe some that you didn't see. Did some plants compete with each other for resources? Did you see any insects in your plots? How about larger animals? How do those things interact with each other and with the plants in the area? How might these interactions change if the climate in your town or state changes? Finally, how do your results compare with the results found in the California grassland meadow research? Now that you know what happened in the South Meadow experiment, compare what you saw or did not see to the research done in the California grassland meadow.